veterans who are coming back so that they can have the level of service that they need. Now, it's one thing to say you support the troops, and then you turn around and you vote against a bill that has $4 or $5 billion in it to support the veterans and the troops coming back. I mean, it seems quite apparent to me that this is something that we need to do. And believe me, nobody wants to get out of the war faster than me. I want to be out this afternoon, tomorrow morning. Let's come back. This has been foolish to begin with. But there's a certain reality on logistical needs and diversity in the country of how we should do this. And so what we've done today was create a real framework for our kids to come back home, to let the Iraqis stand up and put these benchmarks. And I just want to talk for a minute about what these benchmarks are. Because some people say, well, you're tying the president's hands, you're trying to micromanage the war. We are not. That's not true. The facts of the matter are these. The president and the Pentagon have benchmarks. Okay? So how many Iraqi troops need to be trained? What does the political situation need to look like? Have they achieved their political and military benchmarks that have been set by the president? All we're saying is that you have to show some progress towards those benchmarks by July. Now, granted, we've already been in this war longer than we were in World War II. So by July, you better show some progress as to meeting the benchmarks. If you're not showing progress, we will begin to redeploy out. But if by July you are showing some progress, you will then have until October to actually meet the benchmarks. And if you don't meet them by October, we redeploy. If you do meet them by October, we redeploy because you've met the benchmarks.
That's right.
And this is just bringing this war to a reasonable end. And this, what we've done today, I think the end is in sight. Yield to my friend.
I'm so glad that you went through those benchmarks and stressed that these were the president's benchmarks that we used. The president on January 10th outlined the benchmarks for success that he felt were imperative that we meet, and those were that we must give the United States the authority to pursue all extremists. We must rein in the militias and have Iraqis step up to the plate to enforce security. We have to decide how their oil revenues, they have to decide how their oil revenues are going to be distributed. That's a very important benchmark that has to be accomplished. And they have to pass reconciliation initiatives to keep their country together. Their country is essentially about to blow apart. They're in the midst of civil war and are absolutely at the breaking point. Besides those benchmarks that we had in that supplemental that we passed out of the Appropriations Committee today, and besides the incredibly necessary emergency funding that the troops need and that our veterans need, we also put provisions in that legislation to make sure that our troops can catch their breath. I referred to that soldier who I met in Walter Reed, whose little boy just wanted him to come home and who had missed half his little boy's life. We have soldiers many soldiers who have completed 3 tours of duty, are about to go on their 4th, who are deployed for 365 days, and then the deployment is extended. The language we put in that bill ensures and says to the Army that they need to make sure that those deployments are not beyond 365 days. That the President can waive that provision by submitting a report to Congress detailing why that unit's deployment is in the interests of national security. But that's the kind of accountability that we are inserting to protect our troops, to make sure that this President certifies that that deployment, that extension is absolutely essential to protect national security despite the assessment that the unit is not fully mission capable. Our readiness is shot. We are spread so incredibly thin, and we're talking about the impact on human beings' lives. How about the length of deployment? The language in our bill requires the Defense Department to abide by its current policy, avoid extending the deployment of units in Iraq in excess of the 365 days. We have to make sure that those units are fully mission capable, and the time between deployments is essential as well. The Defense Department would be required to abide by, again, its current policy and avoid sending units back into Iraq before troops get the required time out of the combat zone and training time. 365 days for the Army and 210 days for the Marines. And the President can also waive that provision in the interests of national security. He just has to certify to Congress that that's the case. And that is the kind of accountability that the American people insisted on November 7th. They asked us for a new direction in the 606 items in our agenda that we have already passed, and they insisted that we move this war in a new direction so that there would be an end in sight, so that the President would no longer have a blank check, and so that we could make sure we could protect our men and women in uniform who are protecting us. I'd be happy to yield to the gentleman.
I appreciate it.
I'm going to have to take my leave of the gentleman because I have constituents that are in town that I need to speak with.
No, I appreciate the,
look forward to you
the old team being back down here. And I just want to continue as to what we are doing to try to fix this problem. And as I said, with the benchmarks and making sure the Iraqi soldiers stand up. But a key component of this is, Ms. Wasserman Schultz has just mentioned, is that we're saying that our troops can't leave here, the United States, and go to Iraq if they don't have the requisite level of equipment and training. And I don't think there's anybody in the country who would want to send one of our soldiers or lots of our soldiers off to war knowing, and the legal term is mens rea, you know, with intent, send kids that don't have the proper equipment and training. And the training part is something that Ms. Wasserman Schultz was just talking about. We have a readiness crisis in the Army. We are not capable now of handling another situation, military situation. Now, I think if you would ask the American people, are we overstretched, they would all say yes. And if you talk to the military families, they say yes, we're overstretched to the point where we have kids in battle who don't have everything that they need. And that is unacceptable. And so in our supplemental bill, we're saying that if you don't have the training and the equipment and the proper amount of rest, you're not going. Now, we put a waiver in there so that the President could waive it if there's a national security interest involved. But we don't like it. I know I don't like it. I shouldn't speak on behalf of everybody. But the bottom line is the President is the President. He's the commander-in-chief. He won the election in 2004. So we're left to deal with the situation. If you look at some of the polling in the country, 76% of Americans favor requiring U.S. troops returning from Iraq to have at least 1 year in the U.S. before being redeployed. That's the Gallup poll. 77% favor requiring U.S. troops to come home from Iraq if Iraq's leaders fail to meet promises to reduce violence there. And 76% of the American people don't think the Bush administration has done everything they could reasonably be expected to do to care for the needs and problems of veterans. But the bottom line is the American people want accountability, and the American people want to change course. You don't see the kind of wave election that we had in November without a message that comes with it. And the message is we need to change direction. And the Iraq supplemental bill that passed out of the Appropriations Committee today and will pass off the floor next week is that change in direction. Is it everything all of us want? No. Are there things in there that we don't like? Yes. But we have to change direction in this war. It's not going well. And you talk to the families, and, you know, as a member of Congress, I've made the phone calls. Other members of Congress have made the phone calls to parents. We've been to the funerals, and it's not good. And quite frankly, I don't want to go to any more. But I found out yesterday that I've got to go to another one. This war has got to end, and it's got to stop. And what we're doing is the quickest way for us to go about bringing a reasonable, thoughtful end to this war. And that means getting our troops out of the middle of a civil war in Iraq. There are only